Good morning, folks. This is Kelly Jin from the Knight Foundation. You all just heard from some pretty brilliant speakers from across the country as well as locally, and I am very thrilled to be introducing our next panel here. I serve as Vice President for Community and National Initiatives at the John S. and James L. Knight Foundation. We are based here in Miami. Welcome to Miami. And of course, when we heard that the Expo was going to be hosted here in Miami Beach this year, we could not say no to supporting and sponsoring their efforts here. So welcome to everybody. I am delighted to be welcoming up three esteemed panelists, both local and from Knight cities and nationally this morning. I'm going to read out very quickly their bios in the interest of time this morning, and then they will join me up on stage and we'll get going with some questions. So starting out, we have Alejandra Castillo, who is the U.S. Assistant Secretary of Commerce for Economic Development. She has served in leadership positions for 3 presidents, Biden, Obama, and Clinton, and her professional career spans 2 decades, during which she was focused on creating equitable and inclusive opportunities for all Americans. Daniella Levine Cava is Miami-Dade County's first ever woman mayor, a position she holds after a 40-year career as an advocate for South Florida families in public service and elected leadership. Mayor Levine Cava's administration is focused on building a stronger, more inclusive, more resilient Miami-Dade. I am delighted to count her as my mayor here in Miami, and Mayor V. Lyles was reelected as mayor of Charlotte after receiving more than 77% of the vote in the general election. She is known for her strong commitment toward creating jobs, expanding affordable housing options, and supporting safe, livable neighborhoods. So I would ask at this point that you all give a round of applause as they join us up. Are everybody's mics working and on? Well, certainly mine is. I have had, it's always fun in the green room beforehand because you get to ask folks questions as you are preparing for the conversation. And so I was kind of cornered Assistant Secretary Castillo to start talking about federal funding. And I used to work within the federal government during a prior administration. Secretary Castillo, I'd love for you to maybe open us up and talk about things from a 50,000-foot level. You have folks here from private and public sector. So talk to us a little bit more about the I understand to be once-in-a-lifetime funding that's happening at the federal levels, and what people should know for this broad audience here.
So good morning, everyone. Good morning. Or as they say in my household, buenos dias. So thank you for that question, and I'm so honored to be on the stage with mayors. As I was expressing, I think mayors is where it's at. I usually use this quote from Lyndon B. Johnson, who said, when the presidency feels so daunting, he reminded himself it could be worse. He could be a mayor. And that's because with mayors, you have to solve the problems. But let me take the question at the 10,000 feet level. You're absolutely right. It is a funding of a lifetime, and it shouldn't be a funding of a lifetime at the same time. We heard about the American Rescue Plan, which was the first piece of legislation that President Biden signed. We heard about the bipartisan infrastructure law that took 25 years to get it done, and it was done. We've also heard about the CHIPS and Science Act, and just yesterday, the Inflation Reduction Act was signed at the White House. If you take these 4 pieces of legislation, first of all, it is historic and monumental, not because of the size of the money alone, which is in the $3 to $4 trillion, but in the sense of the investment We are finally betting on ourselves. We are finally investing in our communities. And the agency that I lead, which is part of the Department of Commerce, is the Economic Development Administration, the only agency in the federal government focused exclusively on economic development. And we received $3 billion. $3 billion that we had to push out the door in 1 year. But the way that we did it, and I'll stop in a second, was we did 6 different grants. 2 of the major grants was the the Build Back Better Regional Challenge, which was a challenge to communities to give us their recommendations and their vision of what economic development meant in their communities, and the president just announced 21 of those winners. We also did the Good Jobs Challenge, which really tackles the issue of workforce development, talent. How do we not only hone talent, recruit talent, retain talent? And I'm happy to say that Miami-Dade was one of the Good Jobs Challenge winners. So I will stop here because we'll have more to talk about, but I want you to think boldly. I want you to think about this investment, which is a once-in-a-lifetime. What does that mean for your communities? How can you work with us, EDA? We create the ecosystem, everything from water, sewage, storm, pipelines, but also incubators and so much more. So I want to leave you with that invitation, but I also want to leave you with the task of how do we now leverage these dollars to make sure that our future, that we're thinking futuristically, that we're building equity and that we're building resiliency. So I'll pass it on because I know this is a panel that has a lot to say.
Fantastic. Thank you, Assistant Secretary. And that was the perfect tee-up for our mayor here of Miami-Dade County. Mayor, I'd love to hear from you how you've seen the deployment of funds that we just talked about, and maybe talk a little bit more about the equity implications of how we think about the equitable distribution of those dollars here locally.
Well, good morning again, and I'm so excited to be on the stage with these lovely ladies, powerful ladies, and so welcome. Welcome, Secretary, welcome, Mayor, and of course, Knight Foundation is our dream foundation here in Miami-Dade County, headquartered here, but funding around the country, but still in all, our very local special philanthropy that has been at the forefront of helping us to be creative and be innovative. So it's been informed and engaged communities. That's what Knight Foundation is all about. So these federal programs have been a lifeline for our community. So let's just start with that. Apart from the investing in ourselves and being smart, really getting us across these dark days. So, you know, I'm working on my second budget as mayor. It has to be approved by our county commission, and thank God for this administration and this Congress that approved dollars that are really moving us forward across those difficult times. So I just want to say that. Now, looking ahead, we are ready. We have our arms outstretched, and we've brought together our 34 cities, and we have weekly meetings on the infrastructure plan. We have put forward already dozens of applications. We've already received quite a few important investments, and we're doing it through the resilient and equitable lens always. So I'll use some examples. Transportation, I mentioned, of course, we have all kinds of smart components. We actually have a plan or a program that's called the SMART program. So it is all about connecting communities to opportunities. And we're really hopeful, I'll just put in a little plug here, that one of our corridors, we have 6 and we love them equally, but the North Corridor is the one that will be most about equity and long withheld promise. And we think we have a new attitude in this administration about investing in future growth in the northern part of our county that has been left behind for so long. And that is actually the lens through which these grants are being given, right? It's a very explicit direction from the president on down that these dollars be administered in a way that will truly build back communities that were separated. We have an approach that will help us, communities that were really lost they were separated by the highways, right? Many communities in urban places were separated by massive highway projects, and we're working now to bring those communities back together and claim their full heritage. So we also, internet. Clearly, internet is not a luxury, it's a fundamental, and it's to improve our quality of life, as was mentioned earlier by the Mayor Davis, but it's essential. Without real access for all of our communities, we're going to leave communities behind. Just like we saw with the pandemic, those who were not able to keep up with virtual learning, 2 years average learning loss. So we can't allow that to happen. We need to be aggressive and build back, and we are developing our broadband equity plan. From a state perspective, we have to present some of these plans to the state and get state approval. We would prefer that this money come directly to us locally. Let me just make a shameless plug. I speak about that wherever I can, because we know best what we need in our communities. And we think, as the largest county, I think the 4th largest county in the country, that we need to have those investments directly. And let me just end with housing. Everybody know we have a housing crisis in this country. We do, and it turns out that right here, it's the worst in the nation. We have the most expensive cost of living and housing costs compared to our salaries that have not grown at pace with the inflation. So my budget, which, knock on wood, will be approved next Tuesday, has a historic investment in housing for renters, homeowners, developers, to address the affordability and workforce gap. And we're using our federal recovery dollars to put that into action. Without that, we would not be able to really turn the tide on affordability concerns here in Miami-Dade County. And finally, just as another example, the federal assistance for renters, the Emergency Rental Assistance Program. I believe we're one of the most blessed in the country. We've been able to prevent 23,000 households from being evicted. We've spent $123 million, and we're just going to keep on spending to keep people in their homes, keep landlords whole, so that we can continue to move our community forward with these great new investments coming with the bipartisan infrastructure bill. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. And I'm really glad that you, yeah, we can clap for that. I'm really glad that you brought up Knight Foundation's, one of our core values and our North Star around informed and engaged communities. And that'll be my segue to Charlotte, because I've gotten to know this city a bit more over the last year and a half of my tenure. And there's a huge financial private sector tech industry there. And so, Mayor, I'd love to hear maybe from your perspective how you think about public-private partnerships in the context of all of these federal dollars, and anything you can say about specific partnerships with financial companies or even tech companies, to the extent that we're here at a Smart Cities Expo talking about the future of technology.
Well, Kelly, thank you. I am Vi Lyles, and I am mayor of a fast-growing city in North Carolina, Charlotte. Most people I know, you've flown through the airport but didn't have to come into the city limits. You just made it a drop and go kind of thing. So thank you. First, I want to echo the thanks to the Biden and Harris administration. I can't imagine what we would have done if the pandemic had hit us at the time of the former administration. I'm just going to be honest with you. I just don't know what would have happened. And the perspective that the Biden and Harris administration, through commerce, transportation, education, has had a phenomenal impact upon what we can do as cities in this country. And I also want to recognize we are a Knight city as well. Charlotte has been very fortunate to work very well with the Knight Foundation for many years. So it's not a new relationship, it's a strengthened relationship, because during a crisis, we all have to strengthen our relationships. We have to be able to reach out into our communities, from the person that's the neighborhood leader to the CEO that's on the board of maybe Bank of America, or one of the things that we're doing. So I'm going to give you a few examples of things that we did to make sure that our public-private partnerships really had strong growth during this pandemic. We really wanted to make sure that the federal money came to us, but was pushed out into the community. We averaged, I think, 78% of the money that we receive, we immediately began to think, how do we get this to those businesses? How do we get that information out? Small businesses especially. And we have in Charlotte, 1 in, I think, 9 people work in the hospitality industry. And we knew that we had to have those folks have a way to pay their rent, pay their mortgage, feed their families, and during this pandemic. So we began with what I call Charlotte's secret sauce, public-private partnerships. And the Knight Foundation was one of our first partners to step up to say, we will help fund and match and administer this money. Imagine all of this money's coming in, you've got a deadline, you've got people in crises, and you have to do something about it. And frankly, I'm not sure that we were ready and equipped to do it. So we called on the Knight Foundation, our community foundation, and our business leaders, our neighborhood leaders, and said, help us decide how we can best use this money. One of the things that we really tried to establish is that we wanted to use the money effectively, but we also wanted our organizations that were doing well during this crisis, the people that had the ability to sustain their work, that they could contribute to our needs. And so therefore, we did have the public-private partnerships, and I'm going to give you one example. Our community foundation, working on eviction and rental payments and all of those things that were just so key in the moment, it was pretty hard for us to make a decision. And we have lots of affordable housing issues in Charlotte. But what we did was we used the community foundation to accept applications and filter them out to the various agencies that we already had contracts and policies in place, and we were able to keep people in their homes. We did this with the help of both our legal aid department, or the people that worked in legal aid, but the corporate community, primarily in the banking community, sent their corporate attorneys to help us stand at the courthouse door when someone walked in with an eviction notice and said to them, here's another place that you can go. Here's how we're going to keep you in your home. And we did that while the courts were really still processing evictions, and we decided that we weren't going to have that kind of effort, that people just thought it was the same way of doing these relationships. But the most significant partnership that we had was all around recovery and equity in recovery. So over the time that we were in the pandemic, you always are like in the moment, but you have to begin to think about what happens when you move out of it. And I created there is a group in our city called the Charlotte Executive Leadership Team. These are all the CEOs for every one of the major businesses in our county, and they meet on a regular basis, and they always work with the government sector to say, what do we need to do to partner with you? So during this pandemic, I went to them and said, we really are going to need some help if we're going to get people back on their feet. And we created what I call the Mayor's Racial Equity Fund. And we made some key decisions on strategic investments. And I would say one of the very first ones, when COVID hit, we have a small private, historically African-American college in our city. And when that hit them, they were out 2 years of enrollment from the Pell Grants and all of that. And we made a decision that we were not going to let that school close down. And we began a public fundraising effort that said, what do we do, not just to get them back, but how do we make it thrive? And so far, the public commitment to that has been $81 million. That changes a child's life. That changes someone who's their first time going to college. They can come to Johnson C. Smith. But we also had accountabilities because we knew that the curriculum for the jobs of the future were not necessarily the curriculums that were being taught there. And the private sector lent strategy people, leadership people to come in and develop for that university a transformational plan that where they were generally teaching curriculums in education and social work, all of those are going to be strengthened, but now they teach data analytics, and they have a really stronger business program. And one of the things that's going on in Charlotte, we're getting our first medical school. Thank you. I'm just so grateful for the group that's doing that. And I asked the hospital associations to tell us if they would commit, if you went to this university and came out with your degree, they would commit to mentor for 4 years of every summer, 20 to 25 students, and if those students are successful, they automatically get an entrance to the medical school's curriculum so that they become doctors. Now, why is that important? Because black and brown doctors are needed. And the only way to get them there is to start when they're young and they see the vision that they can do this. One of our mottos in all of this work has been, we don't want to give these kids the opportunity to just take a class and go search for a job. We want every kid coming out of that university under this program to have a job offer that they're going to right away as soon as they graduate. And that is really what makes Charlotte works. The idea that we can use our public sector, our philanthropy, our private sector, and the opportunities given to us by the Biden administration with this funding to make our city not just get back and recover, but how do we recover in a way that adjusts for the future? And so I really have other examples. I'm glad to talk about them in transportation and how we're trying to connect people, but most importantly, I think it's the strategic effort to combine all of these opportunities together that will make a change in our cities in the future. Thank you.
Terrific. Thank you, Mayor. I'm very glad that you brought up Johnson C. Smith University. I got a chance to visit. I grilled them on the data analytics degrees, and having come from that world, was very excited to see that being a part of their future that they're building in. Maybe this next question I'll ask of both the Assistant Secretary as well as Mayor Levine Cava, which is, you've got certainly universities thinking about technology, you've got communities thinking about technology, and we're here at a Smart Cities Expo. Starting with you, Assistant Secretary, how do you think about maybe your assessment of a city's strengths in technology and digital? Because that's such a foundation these days, right? How much that exists or doesn't in your evaluation of those ecosystems?
So that's a great question, and I'm going to start with a very quick primer on what is the Department of Commerce, because once you understand what commerce is, U.S. Department of Commerce, then you start to understand how all these pieces are incredibly important to a broader puzzle. So we're in Miami-Dade, and we know that climate is of great concern here. So National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, NOAA, is part of commerce, which is critical as we think about smart cities, but also resilient cities. The Census Bureau is also part of commerce. So when we're talking about people and places, census data is essential. Commerce is also the National Telecommunication and Information Agency, and you will hear from my colleague Andy Burke later on today. There's $48 billion for broadband. But commerce is also the National Institute of Standards and Technology. So when we're talking about how we make things, how we build things, how we measure things, that's NIST. And that is also very important as we think about how we build our cities overall. And then I'll tell you, commerce is also the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office. So when we're talking about technology and innovation, for the entrepreneurs in the room, you want to protect your intellectual property by making sure that you are registering a patent and protecting that. I give you that primer because so many people think, well, what does commerce really do? And my argument here, because I'm a recovering lawyer, is to tell you that it is how we build this ecosystem of technology and innovation. And right now, I mentioned the Build Back Better Regional Challenge, 21 winners that received between $25 and $65 million. And what commerce is doing is seeding or at least investing in either legacy industries that are evolving or new industries. And I'll just give you a quick example. In Binghamton, New York, lithium batteries. In New Orleans, we're talking about hydro energy. In Wichita, Kansas, we're talking about aerospace. In El Paso, Texas, we're talking about defense industry. In Fresno, California, we're talking about agrotech. So commerce is not only pushing these dollars in terms of investments and creating that ecosystem, but I will go back to what Mayor Lyles said. there's a secret sauce, and that secret sauce is invariably, undeniably, partnerships and coalitions. So it's having government, it's having state, local, federal government, it's also having foundations, it's having private sector. And it is in that coalition that we actually can move the needle. So for us, technology innovation is much more than just a linear discussion. It is actually multifaceted, and we work across the federal government. So I believe in government. It's not the solution to everything, but there is a lot of collaboration with the Department of Energy, with the Department of Agriculture, with the Department of Housing, because these problems require all hands on deck. They will not be solved by just brilliant mayors. They're going to be solved by everyone in this room collaborating, thinking about solutions, allowing the solutions, as President Biden says, to come from the bottom up, middle out. So that's just a quick synopsis.
This has been the most direct, concise, pithy panel I've been on, I think, in the last couple of years. And I appreciate all of you in just being so direct and full of examples. I think that's oftentimes, as somebody listening into panels and conversations, I think such an important part of this work is that there are real projects and initiatives, and at the end of the day, real residents that are benefiting from this progress. So, Mayor Levine, Cava, I will kind of ask that question about smart cities, but maybe in two ways for the county. One is, when I think about technology, I think about the industry, so how you've thought about and considered receiving the tech industry and many firms and individuals like myself moving here. And in the other way, I believe your CIO is here in the audience and is here at the Expo, how you think about the use of technology within government to kind of improve and add to efficiencies.
Well, first of all, I was very grateful for that 101 on commerce. And it made me think of how you work across silos. And I think technology is an essential tool to help us deal with the information overload that exists in our world. And I have a quote I like, which is, once upon a time we all lived in communities, and then categorical funding was invented, and now we've been trying to recreate communities ever since. And so, having a secretary, assistant secretary who understands to work across all of those very disparate but critical pieces. And I've had the great good fortune to talk to lots of different secretaries, assistant secretaries, who've brought together so they're thinking holistically, comprehensively in our federal government, just like I have to with 25 departments, how to get them to work together. So that, I'll start with within government, and Margaret Brisbane, who is our fantastic CIO here in Miami-Dade County. We were just having the conversation on the way in this morning, how we make sure that the great innovations happening in one department translate across almost 30,000 employees. Okay, so we've got a massive infrastructure of people, and innovation is happening. We even have our innovation chief for transportation and public works sitting here, Carlos Cruz Casas. So he's within transportation and public works, but the kinds of innovation he's bringing inform across the county. But how do we make sure that everybody is keeping pace and that all these things grow? So we also have a new chief of innovation and economic development, and on his team, building the ecosystem for an innovation economy. So we want to have all of these businesses on steroids with government support, eliminating red tape and bureaucracy to make sure that these businesses can locate and grow here, because those are the good jobs of the future. But then I'll say it's tech in all things. So there's, whether it's fintech, climate tech, blue-green tech, tech in all things. So we are very aware of that and working with our career source, workforce board, and apprenticeships, pipelines. Hopefully the Knight Foundation is investing yet again in, we're calling the Innovation Authority, an idea we learned in Israel when we visited to investigate tech innovation there, and I know some of you are represented here. So we are trying to continue to spur the tech mecca, the tech diaspora to our community and make it something that really benefits our local workforce. So many ways that we're doing that, so that when all these new businesses and innovators come here, that they bring with them their smarts and their people, but they also invest. And I'll just end with this. I challenge all of those who come here to really live like you live here. And the idea is, use your smarts to solve our biggest problems, because now you live here and you recognize whether it's dealing with extreme weather or dealing with heat, also extreme weather, dealing with transportation challenges or educational access issues, all of the opportunities that exist. Apply your innovation mindset to solving this with us, because we are really the epicenter of so many of these challenges and opportunities, and we want to partner with you to make the world better.
Fantastic. Well, Mayor, I think you already proactively answered my last question, which is, what's next, and how can the audience here get involved? So I will just go down the line. But Mayor, is there anything that you wanted to add, maybe in the answer to that question? It's such a good prompt.
Well, we welcome you. We are the most welcoming, affirming place on the planet. So roll out the red carpet. And, we have a lot of good county folks to let you know how to engage with us, and we're here for you. Thank you.
All right. Mayor Lyles, what's next, and how can folks get involved?
This fall, our city council and I will be sponsoring a Resilient City Conference, where we've always had priorities for affordable housing, for good paying jobs, and for the ability to move around the city easily. And we decided we were working with those in silos. We have a transportation plan, an affordable housing plan, all of these things. And so I think for Charlotte, what's next is to tie those things together into a quality of life definition that we can follow and for the next 5 to 10 years. So that's what's next in our community. And I would hope that we continue to invest the federal dollars. We're all very excited about the infrastructure money that's coming in from the federal government for our roads, because in our mass transit systems, those are some of the things that essential workers have to have. And so that was part of how we got to that place. Is this about just a job? Is it just about transit? Is it just about housing? No, it's about what kind of life we want to have in our community. So that's what's next for us.
Thank you. And Assistant Secretary, you have the last word.
Thank you. So I want to close by underscoring equity. We have spoken about it. It is not just a term. It has to be at the core, at the very marrow of what we do. So it is great to talk about technology innovation. It's great to talk about workforce development. But if we are leaving behind an incredibly important segment of